The invitation went out to almost 300 people. My father's second wedding, cousins I had not seen since I was a kid, his coworkers, the mailman, the woman who cut his hair on Main Street for 20 years. Everyone in that town got a cream-colored envelope with gold along the edge. Everyone but me. I am his only daughter, and I found out the date from a photo my aunt posted online, a picture of the little magnet on her refrigerator. June the 12th, at the lake house. That was the part that took the air out of my chest. Not that they left me off the list, that they were holding it at the lake house. My mother's house. The one on Blackberry Lake with her name still scratched into the concrete of the bottom porch step, where she wrote it with a stick the summer they poured it. The house I lived in for 14 months while she died in the back bedroom. My brother called me 2 days after I saw that magnet, and he did not even sound sorry. He said, "Lorna thinks it would just be less awkward for everybody if you sat this one out." Less awkward. For everybody. Here is what none of them knew. 4 years before that wedding, my mother left a sealed letter with an old parish priest, with one line of instruction written across the front of it. And about 90 minutes into that reception, in a white tent set up on the grass she used to weed on her hands and knees, Father Dolan stood up with that envelope. My father set his fork down on the table. He never picked it back up. If you have ever been treated like the family embarrassment by the same people who were living off of everything your mother built, stay with me for this one. Go ahead and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there, because I need you to see exactly how this ended. Let me take you back. My name is Marin Halloway. I am 31 years old, and I am a nurse. I did not become a nurse in a classroom. I became one in a back bedroom that smelled like eucalyptus and clean sheets, sitting on the edge of a hospital bed we rented and put where my mother's reading chair used to be. Her name was Rosalind. Everyone called her Roz. She got sick when I was 26, the kind of sick where the doctor stops using the word if and starts using the word when. My father did not do sick. I want to be fair to him, so I will say it plainly. He loved her, he just could not be in the room with what was happening to her. He would come home from the plant, stand in the doorway of that bedroom for a minute, and then go out to the garage and organize screws until it was dark. My brother Dean lived in Ohio with a job and a family and a very good set of reasons. So it was me. I moved back into my childhood bedroom at 26 years old. I learned how to run a feeding line. I learned the exact tilt of a straw that let her drink without choking. I learned that if I sang the second verse of a hymn, she would fall asleep before the third. For 14 months, that lake house was a hospital, and I was the whole staff. And in the good hours, the ones that surprised us, she would ask me to walk her out to the garden. That garden was the love of her life after us. Tomatoes and dahlias the size of dinner plates, and a whole back fence of blackberry bushes she had been training up the wire for 30 years. I would help her out to a folding chair in the dirt, and she would just look at it. Near the end, she could not weed anymore. So she pointed and I pulled. That is the thing I want you to hold on to. My mother pointing at a weed and me on my knees in her garden pulling it. Because everything that happened later comes back to that. She died on a Tuesday in October, right after the first frost took the last of the dahlias. I was holding her hand. My father was in the garage. He made it back inside about 4 minutes too late, and I have never once held that against him, because grief does what it wants with people. The funeral was huge. Half the county came. My father cried so hard at the front of that church that 2 men had to hold him up on the walk back down the aisle. And for about a year, the two of us were close in a way we had never been. We would sit on that bottom porch step, the one with her name in it, and not say much of anything. I thought that was going to be the shape of the rest of our lives. Me and my dad, and her garden, and the quiet. Then he met Lorna. It was at a grief group at the community center, which I know sounds unkind when I say it flat like that, so let me be honest about my own feelings. At first, I was glad. He was smiling again. He shaved on weekdays again. Lorna was 56, recently widowed, with a laugh she used like a car horn to clear a path in front of her. The first time she came to the lake house, she walked through the whole downstairs like a realtor. She ran her hand along the mantel. She looked up at the water stain on the ceiling that my mother used to call our own personal Michigan. And she said, "Oh, there is so much you could do with this place. I should have heard it then. I did hear it. I just told myself I was being a jealous daughter, and I made myself be quiet." That was the first weed I did not pull. They got engaged 9 months later. And that is when Lorna started what I can only describe as a slow eviction of a dead woman. It began with the garden. I drove up one Saturday in the spring, the way I always did, to get the beds ready for the season. And the blackberry bushes were gone, not trimmed, gone. Torn out down to the root, the whole back fence bare, and a man was there with a little machine grinding the stumps into the ground. Lorna came out onto the porch with a mug of coffee and told me they were putting in a fire pit and a seating area. She said, Honestly, those brambles were a mess. They scratched me every time I went back there. I stood in the dirt where I used to kneel next to my mother, and I could not make a single word come out. My father stood behind her in the doorway, and he looked at his shoes and he said, "It was time to freshen things up, Marin. Freshen things up. 30 years of my mother, torn out by the root, so a woman she never met could have somewhere to put a fire pit." It did not stop at the garden. A month later, I was dropping off donations at the church thrift store, the one Father Dolan's parish ran, and I saw a box on the sorting table with familiar writing down the side. It was my mother's recipe box. Her wooden one, with the little brass latch, the one I learned to cook from standing on a step stool. Lorna had donated it, along with two of my mother's winter coats and a shoebox of photographs and the quilt my grandmother had sewn by hand. The woman at the counter told me a tall lady with a loud laugh had dropped off 6 boxes and said to just keep whatever they wanted and pitch the rest. Pitch the rest. I bought my own mother's recipe box back for $2.75. I sat in the Buick in that parking lot and went through it card by card, and every single one was in her handwriting, and some of them had little notes in the corner. Marin loves this one. "Do not tell Marin there is bourbon in it." I took that box home and put it on my own shelf, and I did not say one word to my father about it, because I already knew what he would say. He would look at his shoes and he would say it was time to freshen things up, and I could not stand to hear it one more time about one more piece of her. I want to tell you I fought. I did not the way I should have. I did what caregivers do. I went quiet and I went home and I got very, very good at not being there. But something in me changed that day because that same spring I remembered something. In her last months, my mother had a visitor I never thought much about. A woman in a gray suit who came 3 separate times and sat in the kitchen with the door closed. Once, after that woman left, my mother took my hand and said something strange. She said, "You are taken care of, sweet pea, no matter what anybody tries to do later." I thought she meant heaven. I thought she meant peace. I was 26 and exhausted, and I filed it under the soft things dying people say, and I forgot it for 4 years. Hold on to the woman in the gray suit. The freezing out got faster after the garden. I was not invited to Thanksgiving that year because Lorna was hosting her own children, and, in Dean's words, the table math was tight. I was not told my father had been in the hospital for 2 nights with his heart until he was already home. Lorna answered his phone now. Lorna managed the calendar now. And when I did come to the lake house, she had a way of standing in doorways so that to get into any room, I had to physically ask her to move. My mother's house, and I had to say excuse me to get into the kitchen. Then, in April, the wedding plans went out to the whole world, and my invitation got lost in a way that was not an accident. When I finally called my father directly and actually got him, before she could take the phone, I asked him one question. I said, "Dad, am I not invited to your wedding?" There was a long quiet. And then he said, "The thing I will hear until the day I die." He said, "Lorna feels you have never really accepted this, and she does not want anything upsetting on her day. Her day, at my mother's house." And I realized my father had made his choice about which woman got to be real in that house, and it was not the one buried up on the hill. I hung up and I sat on the floor of my apartment and I cried the way you cry when there is nothing left to negotiate. And then my phone rang from a number I did not know. It was Father Dolan. He was old now, retired, mostly deaf in one ear, the same priest who had buried my mother and baptized me before that. He said, "Marin, I need you to come to your father's wedding." I actually laughed. It came out of me like a cough. I said, "Father, I am the one person on this earth who is not invited." And he said something that stood every hair on my arm straight up. He said, "I know. Come anyway. Your mother left something in my keeping 4 years ago, and I am bound to do it that day in front of everyone, and I would be a coward to do it without you there." I asked him what it was. He said, "I gave her my word I would not open it or explain it to a living soul before the day. I have kept that word for 4 years. Do not make me break it now. Come and stand in the back if you have to. Just be there." If you have ever gotten a phone call that split your life into a before and an after, you know that I did not sleep that night. I did not know what was in that envelope. I only knew my mother had reached forward 4 years through a dead woman's handwriting to put her hand on my shoulder, and I decided I was going to let her. I drove up to Blackberry Lake on June the 12th in my mother's old Buick, the one I had never been able to sell, with 200,000 miles on it and a door that only opened from the inside. I did not have a fancy dress. I wore navy and my mother's little gold cross, and I parked at the very end of the road behind a row of cars worth more than my apartment. The tent was up on the grass, right over the spot where the blackberries used to be. I came up the side lawn quietly and I stood at the back, behind the very last row of white chairs, next to a table of party favors. I saw the backs of 300 heads. I saw my brother in a suit, Up front, best man, and I saw my father at the end of the aisle in a gray tie, older than I remembered, waiting. Lorna came down the aisle in cream, which is a thing I will simply leave right there. And for about 10 minutes, I watched a wedding I was not allowed to be at, standing on the grass my mother used to kneel in. Then Lorna's maid of honor turned around, saw me, and leaned to whisper. And I watched the whisper travel up that aisle, head to head to head, until it reached the front. Lorna turned around. She found me at the back, and her face did something I will never forget. It was not sadness, and it was not even anger. It was the flat, cold calculation of a woman deciding how to remove an obstacle. She said something to my father, and my father started walking down the aisle toward me in the middle of his own wedding to make his daughter leave. That is when Father Dolan set down his book. He did not shout. He was too old to shout. He just said into the microphone in that cracked voice, "Gerald, stop where you are." And the whole tent went still because a priest interrupting himself is a strange and frightening thing. He reached into his vestments and he took out an envelope. It was yellowed at the edges now, and even from the back, even after 4 years, I knew my mother's handwriting on the front of it. He held it up so the whole tent could see. He said, "Before I finish this ceremony, I have a duty older than this one." 4 years ago, Rosalind Halloway sat in my office and she was very sick, and she asked me to keep this letter and to read it aloud in front of the community on the day her husband remarried. She made me promise, and I do not break a promise to the dead. My father had stopped in the middle of the aisle. Lorna said loudly, "This is not the time," and Father Dolan looked at her over his glasses and said, "She told me you would say exactly that." Then he opened the letter, and he read my mother's voice out loud to 300 people. She wrote, "Gerald, if you are hearing this, then you have found someone new, and I hope with my whole heart that she is good to you, because you were never any good at being alone." The tent laughed a little nervously, and my father did not. She wrote, "But I knew you better than you knew yourself, and I knew that whoever came after me would look at this house and see square footage. So while I still could, I went and saw a lawyer." And there it was, the woman in the gray suit. She wrote, "The lake house was never yours to give away, my love. It came from my grandfather, and it was mine, and 4 years ago I placed it, and the $415,000 from my father's estate that came with it, into a trust. Not for you, Gerald, for Marin." I heard my own name read out in my mother's words, and my knees nearly went. She wrote, "You have the right to live in it for as long as you stay unmarried, and not one day longer. The day you remarry, the house, the land, the garden, all of it, passes in full to our daughter, because Marin is the one who stayed. Marin is the one who pulled the weeds, and I will not have her standing in the back of a room that is legally her own." Father Dolan lowered the page for a second, and he looked straight down that aisle at me, and he said the last part quietly, but the microphone caught it anyway. She wrote, "Marin, sweet pea. If you are hearing this, then they tried to leave you out, and I am so sorry, and I am also not sorry at all because now everyone knows. You are not the one who was left out. You are the one I trusted with everything. Go plant the blackberries again. The wire is still good." I checked, and I stood at the back of that tent, 31 years old, and I put my hand over my mouth and I cried the way I had not cried since I was holding her hand, because she had known. She had known 4 years ago from inside a dying body exactly what this day would look like, and she had reached forward through all of it to stand between me and them one last time. I wish I could tell you the tent erupted. It did not. It went dead silent, the silence of 300 people doing math at the same time. Lorna's face had come apart completely. She turned to my father and said, "Is this true?" And my father, my quiet, weak, grieving father, looked down that aisle at me, and I watched 4 years of a story he had told himself just fall off of his face. He did not answer her. He walked down the aisle, past all of it, all the way to the back, to me. And he did not say sorry because sorry was too small and he knew it. He just said, "Your mother was always the smartest person in any room." And I said, "I know, Dad." The wedding did not happen that day. Lorna and her people were gone within the hour, and the caterers ended up boxing 300 dinners that nobody ate. Before I tell you what I did after that, I want to say one thing. The stories with the parts I could not say out loud for years, the ones that cut closest to the bone, go on Perfect Revenge Stories first and nowhere else. If you want to be in the room when the next one lands, subscribe and turn the bell on. My brother Dean found me on the porch that evening after the last car was gone. He sat down on the bottom step on her name, and for a long time he did not say anything. Then he said, "I did not know about the trust, Marin. I swear to God I did not." And I believed him, which somehow made it worse. Because he did not need to know about a trust to know what was right. He had a phone. He had my number. For 4 years, he had watched them shut a door in my face, and he had called it table math and awkward and Lorna's day. I said, "You knew I was the one who stayed, Dean. You did not need a lawyer to tell you that." He put his face in his hands. He has 3 kids and a good job and a very good set of reasons, and not one of them was ever me. We are better now. Slowly. He drove up 4 times last summer, which is 4 more than in the 4 years before it. But I stopped waiting for Dean a long time ago, somewhere around the second hymn, on my knees, alone. The following Tuesday, I met Ms. Reyes at her office downtown. She was older now, too, still in gray, and she remembered my mother the way you remember someone who made you promise something and meant it. She slid the whole trust across the desk to me, page by page, in plain words. The house, free and clear, the $415,000, which had sat quietly earning interest for 4 years while I clipped coupons in a one-bedroom apartment, and a single folded note clipped to the last page that my mother had left for the lawyer alone. It said, "When you finally give this to my daughter, tell her I am sorry it had to be a fight, and tell her the fight was never hers to win." I had already won it years ago at a kitchen table in a gray suit while she was singing our girl to sleep in the next room. Now, here's the part where you probably want me to tell you I threw him out. I did not. I want to be honest about that because the satisfying ending and the real one are usually not the same thing. The house was mine. The lawyer, a woman named Ms. Reyes, the gray suit herself, confirmed all of it the following week. I could have changed the locks and let my father figure out where a 63-year-old man goes when his dead wife outsmarts him from the grave. Instead, I let him stay, on my terms, in writing, in the house with my name in the trust and my mother's name in the porch step. He and Lorna did not marry. She had wanted a house. She found out there was no house to want, and she moved on to the next widower within the year, and I hear he had a boat. My father and I are not what we were before the garden. Something broke that does not fully mend, but he sits on that bottom porch step with me now, sometimes in the evening. And this spring, without me asking, I came up the drive and found him in the backyard, 63 years old, on his knees in the dirt, restringing the wire along the back fence for the blackberries. He looked up at me, and he had that same look he used to have in the bedroom doorway all those years ago. And I did not make him say anything. I just knelt down next to him and started digging holes. I planted them back exactly where they were. Same wire, same fence. My mother was right, the wire was still good. It took 2 summers, but they came back thick and mean and full of thorns, the way she liked them. And every August now I stand back there and fill a bowl until my hands are purple, in a spot a woman once tried to turn into somewhere to sit. My father waits for that first bowl now. He does not ask for it. He just starts leaving the good ceramic bowl out on the counter around the first week of the month, the blue one my mother always used, washed and set by the sink like a question. And I fill it and I set it on the porch step next to him, the one with her name in the concrete, and we eat blackberries until our fingers are stained and neither of us has to say the thing out loud. Last August, he finally said it anyway. He said, "I let a stranger throw your mother out of her own house and you let me stay in it. I do not understand you, Marin." And I told him the truth. I said, "I did not do it for you, Dad. I did it because she asked me to plant the blackberries again, and you cannot grow blackberries in a house full of grudges. There is not enough light for it." He laughed at that, the first real laugh I had heard out of him in years, and it sounded so much like the man he was before the garage, before the doorway, before all of it, that I had to look out at the water for a minute and let it pass. People ask me if I am angry that it took a letter, that my own father needed a dead woman to be read aloud in front of the whole county before he could see me. For a long time I was. I am not anymore, because I finally understood what my mother understood 4 years before I did. She did not write that letter to take a house back. She wrote it so that on the worst day of my life, in a crowd of people who had decided I did not belong, I would hear her voice out loud telling 300 witnesses whose daughter I was. That was never about the $415,000. It was about the weeds. So let me leave you with the one thing she taught me on her knees at the end of her life. Anybody can throw you out of a room, but they cannot throw you out of what you built with your own 2 hands, on the ground where you stayed when everyone else went out to the garage. I am the one who stayed. I always was, and now everybody knows. Tell me in the comments about the person who reached forward and protected you when you did not even know it yet, and I will see you in the next one.